Hacer abete perro begerto. Yeta perro begelo que coming. Macarnis beaderto. Yirs beabegelo que coming. Genes haho catarota arusanoto.
Shalom, shalom, family. It's Moreh Ari, Moreh Aryeh, or Raya. Today we're going to do a lecture over the book of Daniel, and it is titled The Book of Daniel Under a Microscope. Is it authentic? When was it written? An in-depth textual criticism. All right. So in this lecture, The Book of Daniel Under a Microscope, we are going to follow in the introduction to the critical dating of Daniel, the script and language divide, the linguistic and smoking gun, which is the Greek loanwords, the old Persian bureaucracy, anachronism, and the archaeological clashing point, and as well as the historical target. And then we'll finish with the closing daggers, okay, of the argument. Of the lecture. So what is the traditional claim? The traditional claim is that Daniel was written in the 6th century BCE by an elite Judean captive named Daniel inside the royal Babylonian and Persian courts. The academic consensus, though, is it is compiled, edited, and finalized in the 2nd century BCE, specifically between 167 and 164 BCE during the Maccabean crisis under the Seleucid king Antiochus Epiphanes. Right, the methodology. The text functions as a historical artifact. Its alphabet shifts, foreign loanwords, and sudden prophetic blind spots provide clear forensic evidence of its Hellenistic origin. And so I will be dropping a couple of videos this week. I have been having all these lectures and lessons just pent up for almost a year now. And so I think the time is right for me to start dropping them. So be on the lookout for, make sure you have your bell button hit, the notification hit, so you can see whenever a video gets dropped and you can see the newest lecture. Okay. So I have a whole bunch of lectures just to show y'all. Let me see here. You see all these right here that I hadn't even done yet. I need to make the video. So it'll be a lot coming. The script and the language divide, right? Section 1. The book of Daniel was entirely unique due to its bilingual nature, splitting cleanly between Hebrew and Imperial Aramaic. To analyze its timeline, we must look at the evolution of the scripts used by the scribes. And so what is the structural layout? So the structural layout is this right here. Daniel chapter 1 through chapter 2 verse 4 is in Hebrew. It is the introductory narrative. Daniel 2 verses 4, second half of verse 4 through 7 and 28 is in Imperial Aramaic, and it covers the court tales and the initial visions. Daniel 8 chapter 1 through verse 12 and 13 is back in Hebrew, excuse me, concluding apocalyptic visions. All right, so that's how it goes. It goes from Hebrew to Aramaic back to Hebrew. So during the genuine 6th century BCE, Judeans wrote using the Paleo-Hebrew script derived directly from Phoenician. The Assyri script, the square block Aramaic characters used in modern Hebrew Bibles, was adopted by Jews during the Persian period. It did not become the standard literary script until the Hellenistic era. Okay. So now we have here Daniel 2 and 4, and it tells you right here, it says, Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, Aramaic, right? Aramaic. And we have that right here in English, in the Assyri square block script, and in the Paleo Hebrew. So now the presence of the Greek instruments. So the presence of Greek musical instruments in Nebuchadnezzar's court is the most definitive linguistic evidence for a later date. Greek technical vocabulary could not be naturally embedded into Imperial Aramaic court documents centuries before Alexander the Great's conquest in 332 BCE flooded the Near East with Hellenistic culture. And then we have it right here. And what does it say in Daniel? We have it in English. That at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the dulcimer, and all kinds of music. And it's here in the block script in the Paleo. And so now we're going to take a look at some of these words right here. The forensic linguistics. So kitados. What is a kitados? So kitaros is a transliteration of the Greek word kitharos or kithra, which is a classical Greek lyre. Pesanatrin. It is transliteration of the Greek word psalteron, a stringed instrument. Note that the Aramaic pe and the Samic are explicitly joined to phonetize the unique Greek letter psi, right? So you have the pe and the Samic, pese, psi, sinarenitin, right? Says, pe, or psi. You have the psi, phy, psi, and you have the pesanatrin, pesanatrin. All right. Then you have the symphonia, symphonia, transliteration of the Greek symphonia, in an ensemble or double pipe instrument. This spelling reflects a late Hellenistic musical development, entirely non-existent in archaic 6th century Greek or Babylonian context. So during the 6th century, when Daniel was supposedly written, this instrument didn't even exist. It didn't even exist. So now we move to the textual nexus, the Greek, some more Greek loanwords, right? And we're still on those, the instruments. At that time, you hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, 3 and 5. And you see here, pesaneritin, and you see here the kentaros, right? And it's in the verse, in the Paleo and in the Hebrew, and in the Ashuri. So let's look at the etymology of kataros and kitharos. The etymology. This is a direct lexical import of the Greek stringed instruments, the kithra or kitharos. The phonetic proof. Notice the use of the Aramaic letter kuf to represent the hard Greek kappa kappa, and the Samic to lock in the terminal Greek sigma. This isn't a vague semantic parallel. It is a phonetic spelling of a Greek word by a scribe whose ear was entirely accustomed to hearing Hellenistic Greek spoken in the marketplace, right? So you see in right here the kunf and the samit, right? The kunf, right, and the samit to get that sound, to get the kuf os. The pesaneritin and the psalteron. This word provides absolute mechanical proof of a late date. The Greek language possesses the unique double consonant letter psi, which makes a ps sound. Imperial Aramaic has no single letter for this sound. So the psalteron, right? Psalteron ps. There's no letter. There's no sound like that in Aramaic. There's no sound at all. To capture it, the scribe had to physically engineer a compound phonetic cluster using the pe for the p sound and the samic for the s sound for sa, psalteron, sa. The morphological shift here is the transition from Greek terminal on to the Aramaic masculine plural in, right here. It is a textbook example of a late loanword being grammatically assimilated into Imperial Aramaic during the Hellenistic linguistic shift. Because again, during the time of the Maccabean time, they were Aramaic was present in the land. It wasn't biblical Hebrew, it was Aramaic. Now let's look at symphonia. Traditionalists claim this word is ancient, but historical linguists reveal that the word symphonia did not refer to a specific singular musical instrument in the archaic Greek, such as during the 6th century BCE of Homer or Pythagoras. In early Greek, it was an abstract nominal expression meaning concord of sounds or harmony. It was only during the late Hellenistic and plebeian eras, 2nd century BCE, that the symphonia shifted systematically to denote a concrete musical instrument, likely a double pipe or bagpipe mechanism. The author of Daniel is using the late Semitic definition, completely exposing the 2nd century window. All right, so that's even more proof, red flag. So now we move to the institutional chronology, the Persian anachronisms. So now we go to Daniel 3 and 2, right? So what does it say in 3:2 in the English? Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, and the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the province. All right, so the presence of there's a presence of over 15 Old Persian loanwords embedded naturally within the Babylonian court descriptions, creates a massive and insurmountable historical anachronism. All right. So if Daniel was a genuine historical figure writing under the actual Neo-Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, who lived from 605 to 562 BCE, the administrative language of the text would be heavily saturated with Akkadian and Babylonian loanwords, because that was the living bureaucratic mechanism of the state. Instead, Daniel uses a fully matured, deep lexicon of Old Persian bureaucratic titles that did not exist until the Achaemenid Persian Empire conquered the region and systematically overhauled the global court infrastructure decades later, right? Decades later. So the Babylonian, the words that he used to describe those positions are Old Persian, not even Akkadian, not even Hebrew, and it shouldn't be Old Persian. And we're going to get into that later on. If you stay tuned still and listen all the way to the end, you will see the words that are being pointed out, etc. So now let's do a deep semantic breakdown of the key Persian terms, right? So the Persian term ahasdarpneia, right? Ahasdarpneia, right? So what is this? What is the source of this? This is direct transliteration of the Old Persian compound Zora, which is realm or province, plus pavan, which means protector or guardian. The historical clashing point. All right. So now, what is the clashing point? How can we prove this? This is the administrative title for a satrap. The complex satrapy provincial system was a distinctly Persian imperial invention, formally implemented and mapped out under the structural reforms of Darius I in 522 through 486 BCE. Nebuchadnezzar never ruled via a Persian satrapy system. He ruled via traditional Neo-Babylonian governors, a pahutu. Placing satraps inside of Nebuchadnezzar's court is the historical equivalent of claiming George Washington sent a text message to his cabinet. Impossible. Impossible. Now let's look at the word databaria. Databaria. This comes from the Old Persian compound databara, right? Data meaning law or decree, paired with the root bar meaning to bear or to carry. Thus, a databara is literally a law bearer or royal imperial judge, right? The word dat for law is completely absent from early pre-exilic Hebrew and Aramaic, right? So why is that word there? It is an exclusively Persian legal import. They should have used the word, right? The author of Daniel is so far removed from ancient Babylon that they cannot even conceptualize a court legal system operating without utilizing deep Persian legal terminology. Smoking guns. Smoking guns. Most High says, study to show thyself approved. Study to show thyself approved. Right? So we're still on the deep semantic breakdown of the key Persian terms, right? Now we have Adar Gazaria. Adar Gazaria. It comes from the Old Persian Asanjazara, meaning counselors or supreme judges. The presence of this word proves that the text was written long after the Persian language had thoroughly bled into, altered, and settled within the Aramaic dialects of Judea over centuries of occupation. Because that is not a Neo-Babylonian system at all. Any apologist tries to acclaim that Daniel wrote this in the 6th century BCE because he lived into the Persian period. They are completely destroying their own position. Living into the early Persian period might explain why a scribe knows a few Persian words, but it cannot explain why those Persian words are being retroactively inserted into the mouth of Nebuchadnezzar decades prior. Red flag number 3 or 4. The narrative explicitly presents Daniel 3 as an event occurring during the peak of the Babylonian Empire. The fact that the author describes Babylonian courtiers using 15 plus complex Persian titles means the author's living language was completely flooded with post-Persian, post-Hellenistic vocabulary. They literally could not separate historical Babylonian realities from their own contemporary Hellenistic language landscape. Right? So we're still on the old Persian bureaucracy anachronism. The text contains at least 15 highly specific Old Persian loanwords used to describe government offices, royal decrees, and clothing. These terms did not exist in the Neo-Babylonian administration under Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel 3 and 2. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains. Right? And so we have here Ahasdaparneia, the satraps from Old Persian. We have Databareia, lawbearers and judges from the Old Persian Databar, and these words shouldn't even be in there. They're not part of the Neo-Babylonian court. An authentic 6th century scribe living under Babylonian rule would use Babylonian, aka Akkadian, administrative vocabulary, not a dense array of Persian bureaucratic titles before the Persian Empire had even finished organizing its regional administrative systems. Now, let's look at the prophetic cutoff point, right? Daniel chapter 11. The historical accuracy of the book serves as a chronological guide, showing exactly where the author's real-time knowledge stops and speculation begins. So number one, we're going to look at the flawless history. Vaticinum ex eventu, a prophecy after the fact. Daniel chapter 11 verses 5 through 39 details the highly intricate Syrian wars between the Ptolemy Empire, king of the south, and the Seleucid Empire, king of the north. Daniel 11 and 31 is the desecration. And they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. This maps exactly to December 167 BCE, when Antiochus Epiphanes banned the daily temple offering. Right? He banned the Tamid and set up an altar to Zeus inside the Jerusalem temple, initiating the Maccabean revolt, and that's what started the Maccabean revolt. Number two, the abrupt prophetic failure. At verse 40, the precise historical mapping completely breaks down. Daniel 11, 40 through 45. The text predicts that Antiochus would launch a massive final campaign into Egypt and Libya, ultimately dying in Judea between the seas of the glorious Holy Mountain. But the historical reality is that Antiochus did not return to Egypt. He marched east into Persia, which is modern-day Iran, to pillage a temple of Elymas and replenish his empty treasury. He fell ill and died in Tabe in 164 BCE. So what is the conclusion? The author wrote the book during the ongoing desecration, approximately 167 to 165 BCE. They recorded the past perfectly because it was already history, but missed the actual location and manner of Antiochus' death because it had not yet occurred. And you can Google it, look it up, and see when and where he died. And it's different than that prophecy in Daniel 11. So what are the apologists' defense? I mean, we're going to go through a couple of them. Defense once. Greek words could have traveled east via early trade routes or Greek mercenaries fighting the Babylonian army during the 6th century. And what I'll say to that is international trade brings loan words for physical commodities, luxuries, and raw materials. It does not plant highly specific post-classical musical terminology, the psalteron and the symphonia, directly into formal royal administrative decrees. Furthermore, the explicit spelling of symphonia matches the late Hellenistic usage, not the archaic Greek variant. Defense number two. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain fragments of Daniel dating close to the Maccabean era, proving the book must be much older to be accepted by the Qumran community. My reply would be, the Qumran manuscripts, such as Daniel 4, actually support a late date. The Daniel scroll displays significant text type variations, and the book was not yet canonized within the section of the prophets. It was relegated to the Ketuvim, winnings, or later writings. During a crisis like Antiochium, persecution and apocalyptic resistance texts promising the imminent fall of the tyrant would spread rapidly. It did not require centuries to achieve popularity. It was immediate, targeted survival literature. And that's it. And we're going to have some more. We're going to have Sirach. We're going to show how Sirach puts the dagger into this. Defense number 3. Daniel correctly names Belshazzar as king, a fact completely lost to later Greek historians like Herodotus until modern archaeology rediscovered Nabonidus' co-regent. While the author retained the memory of Belshazzar, the text gets the basic Babylonian royal lineage completely wrong, proving it was not written from a distant historical perspective. Daniel 5:2 repeatedly asserts that Nebuchadnezzar was Belshazzar's father. Historically, Belshazzar's father was Nabonidus, a usurper completely unrelated to Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel 5:31 invents an entire empire and ruler, Darius the Mede. History shows that Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon directly. There was never a Median empire ruling Babylon between the Babylonians and Persians. The author confused the historical Persian king Darius I and mistakenly placed him chronologically ahead of Cyrus. If the author were an elite 6th century Babylonian administrator, he would not invent a fictional empire or misidentify his own kings. So the archaeological reality, how Nebuchadnezzar's court was actually set up. Archaeological excavations in the southern palace of Babylon in Das Sudburg by Robert Kildaway, along with thousands of administrative cuneiform tablets, show that Nebuchadnezzar II's court was a highly centralized, deeply ritualistic, and aggressively bureaucratic machine. The physical space, the throne room. The center of imperial power was the great throne room in the southern palace. It was a massive hall measuring roughly 170 feet long by 56 feet wide. The walls were clad in breathtaking, brightly glazed blue bricks featuring relief sculptures of lions and stylized palm trees designed to completely intimidate visiting foreign dignitaries and captives. The king sat at a recessed niche at the center of the wall, opposite the main entrance, elevated and isolated from the rest of the courtiers. Right? And so what was the genuine Babylonian bureaucracy? The actual administrative hierarchy of Nebuchadnezzar's court had specific native East Semitic / Akkadian titles. The kingdom was not run by satrap or Persian judges. It was run by the Rab Ulu, the Grand Vizier or Prime Minister, the Sendabaku, the Chief Financial Administrator or Governor of key economic centers, the Bel Pahati, the native Babylonian regional governors, the Tupsaru, the elite class of professional scribes who recorded imperial business in Akkadian cuneiform on clay tablets. These are the titles of Nebuchadnezzar's court, none of the ones that we mentioned prior. So here is the proof, the Hofkalender, the court almanac. This cuneiform tablet is a literal directory of Nebuchadnezzar's actual court officials, dating directly to his reign, circa 570 BCE. It lists the names and titles of the men who sat at the very room described in Daniel. The administrative tier, and we have the 6th century Babylonian position title. We have the word that Daniel uses and the linguistic origin. So the regional governors, the Bel Pahati, right? And Daniel calls them the Dadabara. That's Old Persian. The royal judges are the Dayanu. Daniel calls them the Ahasdarpaneya. That's Old Persian from Dadabara, the lawbearer. Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar called the chief advisors Umanu, scholars and sages. Book of Daniel, Daniel 3:2, he calls them Adar Gazaria. That comes from the Old Persian Asan Jazara. So you see the differences in the linguistics, and you can see that no, this right here is a retro written book. It was not written during that time. It was written during the Maccabees, and you can tell because of the proof. And this is a historical clay tablet, the Hofkalender, and these are the titles that are on that historical clay tablet. So what is the conclusion from the data? If the book of Daniel was written by a real 6th century high-ranking Babylonian administrator named Daniel, he would have used the exact titles found in the Hofkalender. He would have written about Bel Pahati and the Dayanu, because those were the titles written on the clay tablets he would have handled daily. Instead, the author of Daniel uses satraps and databara. These words do not appear anywhere in the thousands of excavated Neo-Babylonian cuneiform texts. They are strictly Achaemenid Persian words that only seeped into Judean Aramaic centuries later. Centuries, not decades, but centuries, hundreds of years later, during the Persian and Greek occupations. The Istanbul Hafkalender gives us the literal seating chart of Nebuchadnezzar's palace. The names on that clay tablet are native Babylonian. The names in the book of Daniel are Persian and Greek. The text of Daniel does not reflect the court of the 6th century BCE. It reflects how a Jewish author in the 2nd century BCE imagined a 6th century court looked, using only the imperial language they knew. Okay? Now, we're going to look at the historical record. We're going to go to 1 Maccabees, chapter 1, read 44 through 47, verse 54. Verse 44. And the king, Antiochus Epiphanes, sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the cities of Judah. He directed them to follow customs strange to the land, and to forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary, to profane Sabbaths and feasts, to defile the sanctuary and the priests, to build altars and sacred precincts and shrines for idols, to sacrifice swine and unclean animals. Now verse 54. Now on the 15th day of Kislev, in the 145th year of the Greek kingdom, which is 167 BCE, they erected a desolating sacrilege upon the altar of burnt offering. All right. Now let's go to the eyewitness reflection in Daniel 11:31. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. All right, and that is the eyewitness reflection. Right, and you have right here the historical record, and the eyewitness reflection. Again, 1 Maccabees 1:45, Antiochus explicitly commands his officers to forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices in the sanctuary. Daniel 11:31, the text laments that they shall take away the daily sacrifice, the ha-tamid. 1 Maccabees 1:54, the Greek historical text notes that they erected a desolating sacrilege on the altar in the month of Kislev, which is December. Daniel 11:31, the text matches this phrase word for word, calling it the abomination that maketh desolate. Ha-sichot mishchamim. This was the literal pagan altar to Zeus Olympios that Antiochus built on top of the traditional altar of burnt offerings. Now, the chronological trap. For Daniel 11:31 to be genuine predictive prophecy written in 530 BCE, the Most High would have bypassed the entire Babylonian Empire, the entire Persian Empire, the conquest of Alexander, the Ptolemaic dynasty wars, just to give Daniel a micro-detailed play-by-play description of a minor Syrian king banning sacrifices for exactly 3 years in the 2nd century BCE. If the author of Daniel possessed a divine supernatural telescope that allowed them to see the exact altar desecration of 1 Maccabees 1:54 with perfect historical accuracy, why does that telescope suddenly break at Daniel 11:40? As shown in my previous slides, Daniel 11:40 through 45 predicts Antiochus would die in Judea after conquering Egypt. But history recorded in 1 Maccabees 6:1 through 16 proves Antiochus actually died out east in Persia. The text of Daniel tracks perfectly within the historical timeline up until the winter of 167 through 165 BCE, and then immediately fails the moment it attempts to predict anything past that window. The author of Daniel did not live in the 6th century Babylonian palace. They lived in a 2nd century Judean hiding place. They were holding a pen in one hand and looking at the horrifying events described in 1 Maccabees 1 with their own eyes. They wrote the past as prophecy to validate their message, but they couldn't write the actual future because it hadn't happened yet. Now, let's look at the fictional 70 weeks. Teachers of the Biblios run to Daniel 9 to prove a supernatural timeline and to prove Christ. But when you look at the raw history, the math actually proves the author was living in the Maccabean era and trying to force history to fit a symbolic number. Now, the problem is Daniel 9:2 and Daniel 9:24. The text, Daniel looks at the prophecy of Jeremiah, which stated that Jerusalem would lie desolate for 70 years, Jeremiah 24:11. An angel then appears and tells Daniel it's actually 70 weeks of years, equals 490 years, until the end of sin and the anointing of the Most Holy. So the real world math, if Daniel received this in the first year of Darius, which would be 538, adding 490 years brings you roughly to 48 BCE, the late Roman Republic Julius Caesar era. It misses the 6th century timeline completely. Right? The Maccabean solution. The 490-year timeline only makes sense if it is a calculation error by a 2nd century BC author who lacked access to precise historical records. Scribes in the Hellenistic era notoriously miscalculated the duration of the Persian Empire, shortening it by nearly 150 years. If you map the 70 weeks using the historical perspective of the 2nd century Jew, it locks perfectly into the Maccabean crisis, which I keep trying to tell everybody that everything is about the Greeks and everything in the book of Daniel is all about the Greeks. The Anointed One cut off Daniel 9 and 20 in Daniel 9 and 26. This matches Onias III, the legitimate high priest who was assassinated in 171 BCE, exactly at the beginning of the final week or 7-year period of the Maccabean crisis. The halting of sacrifice in Daniel 9:27. In the midst of the week he shall cause a sacrifice and the oblation to cease. This is the exact 3.5-year period, half of a 7-year week, between Antiochus' desecration in 167 BCE and the cleansing of the temple by Judea's Maccabees in 164 BCE. The math doesn't point to a far future cosmic prediction. It is an exact mathematical grid of the Maccabean revolt designed by an author trying to prove that Jeremiah's 70 years were finally expiring in their own lifetime. Now, what is the dead giveaway? If Daniel was a legendary 6th century BC prophet on the level of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, his book would be cataloged alongside them. It isn't. The Hebrew Bible is strictly divided into 3 historical layers of canonization. 1. Torah, the law. 2. The Nevi'im, the prophets. And 3. The Ketuvim, the writings, the latest section to be canonized. So before it was only 2 sections, the Torah and the prophets, right? And then you have the writings. That was the newest canonized section. So now we look at the Torah, the law, the Nevi'im, the prophets, which includes Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Ketuvim, the writings, includes Psalms, Esther, and Daniel, was canonized late. In the Hebrew Bible, Daniel is not included in the Nevi'im, the prophets. It is placed in the Ketuvim, the writings, sitting alongside late post-exilic books like Esther, Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Right? So it's not like all those books. I mean, it is what it is. The collection of the prophets were formally compiled and sealed as a closed canon in around 200 BCE. If the book of Daniel had actually been floating around since 530 BCE, it would have easily been placed in the prophets next to Ezekiel. The only reason Daniel was excluded from the prophets and shoved into the late Ketuvim is because the book did not exist yet, when the prophetic canon was closed in 200 BCE. The Jewish scribes knew it was a newly emerged Hellenistic text, so they had no choice but to place it in the final open repository of holy literature. So now, the silence of Ben Sira. Look at the external historical testimony of Yeshua ben Sura, right? So the evidence, what is the evidence of Sirach? Sirach 44 through 49 was written in 180 BCE. Around 180 BCE, just over a decade before the Maccabean revolt, a Jewish scribe named Ben Sira wrote a famous book called Ecclesiasticus, or the Wisdom of Ben Sira. In chapters 44 through 49, he writes a massive definitive historical directory titled Praise of the Ancestors. He systematically lists every single major holy figure in Jewish history, explicitly naming Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, Aaron, Joshua, David, Solomon, Hezekiah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and all 12 minor prophets, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, and Joshua the high priest. He lists every single major and minor prophet who lived before, during, and after the Babylonian exile. Yet he doesn't drop a single syllable about an elite royal court administrator who survived a lion's den, altered imperial decrees, and wrote sweeping cosmic visions. How can a comprehensive who's who of Jewish prophets written in 180 BC completely miss the most spectacular apocalyptic prophet of the tradition? The answer is absolute. In 180 BCE, the book of Daniel had not yet been written. That's why. So, Ben Sura wrote this apocalyptic catalog, the Jewish heroes, around 180 BCE. He moves methodically through history, grouping the great figures of the Babylonian exile and the subsequent restoration. And you see right here we have Sirach 49, 6 through 15. Second. Verse 6. Who set fire to the chosen city of the sanctuary, and who made its streets desolate, as Jeremiah had foretold? For they had mistreated him, who even in the womb had been consecrated a prophet, to pluck up and ruin and destroy, and likewise to build and to plant. It was Ezekiel who saw the vision of glory, which Elohim showed him above the chariot of the cherubim. For Elohim also mentioned to Joab, who held fast to all the ways of justice. May the bones of the 12 prophets send forth new life from where they lie, for they comforted the people of Yaakov and delivered them with confident hope. How shall we magnify Zerubbabel? He was like a signet ring on the right hand. And so was Jeshua son of Jehozadak. In their days they built the house and raised a temple holy to Elohim, to Adonai. The memory of Nehemiah also is lasting. He raised our falling walls and set up gates and bars and rebuilt ruined houses. Nor was anyone ever born like Joseph. Even his bones were cared for. So why was Ezra omitted, right? He didn't mention Ezra, but Ezra was omitted. Ben Sira omitted Ezra intentionally as a political snub because Ezra's scribal movement conflicted with Ben Sira's priestly theology. However, Daniel is omitted because no one in 180 BCE had ever heard of him. Ezra left behind a massive, traceable administrative legacy that Ben Sira actively chose to ignore. Daniel left behind a massive cosmic vacuum that wasn't filled until the Maccabean scribes forged his book in 167 BCE. Ben Sira was a staunch supporter of the Zadokite high priesthood, the elite priestly class running the temple in his day, whom he praises extensively in Sirach chapter 50 via the high priest Simon. Okay? Now, let's look at the historical sequence of Ben Sira maps out. He names the prophet of the destruction, Jeremiah, the prophet of the exile, Ezekiel, the collective book of the 12 minor prophets, and then immediately jumps to the heroes who rebuilt the walls and the temple after the exile, Zerubbabel, Yeshua son of Jehozadak, and Nehemiah. Daniel is completely missing. There is zero historical or literary explanation for why a scribe in 180 BCE would comprehensively honor every single major prophetic figure of the Babylonian exile while entirely leaving out a man who allegedly served as the prime minister of Babylon, survived the den of lions, received sweeping cosmic blueprints, and predicted the exact timeline of the end of days. The omission is definitive proof. In 180 BCE, the book of Daniel did not exist in the Judean consciousness. Didn't exist. So, the language points to Greece, the administration points to Persia, the history points to the winter of 167 BCE, and the canon prove it emerged after 200 BCE. A contemporary Jewish historians in 180 BCE had never even heard of his name. The book of Daniel is a masterfully crafted 2nd century BC resistance playbook. It was designed to keep the Jewish people from capitulating to a Greek tyrant by showing them that history was already mapped out, and that their victory was structurally guaranteed. If Daniel received this prophecy in the first year of Darius the Mede, which the text says around 538 BCE, and you added the 490-year decree, the timeline lands squarely around 48 BCE, the era of Julius Caesar and the late Roman Republic. It completely misses the era of Jesus of Nazareth by nearly half a century, right? Misses it by a whole lot. And it misses the destruction of the Second Temple, 70 CE, by more than 100 years. The math proves a 2nd century origin. The ancient Jewish historians during the Hellenistic period did not possess accurate, standardized chronological charts of the Persian Empire. Scribes routinely compressed the duration of the Persian rule, believing it lasted about 34 to 52 years rather than its actual historical duration of over 200 years. When a 2nd century BCE author calculated backward from their own time during the Maccabean revolt in the era of Jeremiah, 490 years was the exact chronological estimation they arrived at. The real Maccabean alignment, which is the author explicitly breaks down the final week, the last 7 years of the 490-year period, to match the events they were watching unfold in the real time, the Maccabeans. The cutting off of an anointed one, Daniel 9:26, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah the anointed one be cut off, but not for himself, Ananias, and the history. This aligns with the assassination of the legitimate high priest Onias III, who was deposed and murdered in 171 BCE, marking the exact start of the final 7-year crisis of the Maccabean era. The halting of the sacrifice in Daniel 9:27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. All right. The history of the midst of the week represents 3.5 years. This is the exact duration of the temple desecration. Antiochus Epiphanes stopped the daily sacrifices in 167 BCE, and the temple was subsequently cleansed and restored by Judas Maccabeus exactly 3.5 years later in 164 BCE. The math fails as a 6th century BCE predictive prophecy because it does not align with the far future. Instead, it serves as a piece of 2nd century BCE calculated apocalypticism. The author observed the temple desecration from 167 BCE, looked back at Jeremiah's 70-year prophecy, adjusted the math to 490 to accommodate the historical gaps in their own Hellenistic records, and used it to assure the contemporary audience that the 3.5 years of Greek tyranny were structurally determined by Elohim to end immediately. All right, so the fictional Darius the Mede. Daniel 5:30-31. In that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain, and Darius the Mede took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So being 32 years old. According to the author of Daniel, world history followed this exact sequence of empires: Babylonian Empire, Median Empire ruled by Darius the Mede, then the Persian Empire ruled by Cyrus. The reality, though, is that every single surviving contemporary cuneiform record, including the Cyrus Cylinder, the Chronicle of Nabonidus, and the standard Greek histories like Herodotus, proves this sequence is total fiction. Cyrus the Great conquered the Median Empire first in 550 BCE. He then marched on Babylon and captured it in directly 539 BCE. There was never a Median Empire that ruled over Babylon after the Chaldeans, and there is absolutely no record in world history of a figure named Darius the Mede. The 2nd century BCE author was confused by the later Persian king Darius the Great, who ruled after Cyrus. Because the author was writing 350 years after the fact, without a precise history book, they accidentally reversed the chronological order of Darius and Cyrus, invented a Median background for Darius to make Isaiah 13 and 17 fit, which predicted the Medes would destroy Babylon, and created a completely fictional king. An elite 6th century royal court administrator would not invent the ruler who allegedly appointed him to office. Now, let's look at the prayer of Nabonidus from the Dead Sea Scrolls. The story of King Nebuchadnezzar going mad and living like a beast in the wilderness for 7 years, in Daniel 4, must be a true biographical memory. The Dead Sea Scrolls completely expose this story as a late piece of heavily edited folklore. The evidence is in 4Q242, the prayer of Nabonidus. Discovered in Cave 4 at Qumran, this ancient Aramaic fragment dates directly to the late Hellenistic era. It tells the exact same story as Daniel 4, but with a historically correct king. And what does it say? The words of the prayer which Nabonidus, king of the land of Babylon, the great king, prayed when he was afflicted with a malignant inflammation by the decree of the god of the city of Taima. For 7 years I was praying to gods of silver and gold, bronze, iron, wood, stone, and clay. But a Judean diviner explained my illness. History proves the actual last king of Babylon, Nabonidus, abandoned his capital for nearly 10 years to live in the Arabian desert oasis of Tema, but causing massive political upheaval. Tema is in northern Saudi Arabia. The author of Daniel did not have first-hand access to 6th century records. They took a popular floating piece of folklore about Nabonidus' historical absence, accidentally assigned it to the far more famous king Nebuchadnezzar, and dramatized it into the king turning into a literal animal. The Dead Sea Scrolls caught the author red-handed mid-edit. When Judas Maccabeus successfully defeated the forces of Antiochus and cleansed the temple in December 164 BCE, the exact 2,300 evenings and mornings predicted in Daniel 8 and 14 were fulfilled in the minds of the people. However, because the author's future predictions about the immediate arrival of the resurrection and the cosmic end of days in Daniel 12 failed to happen after Antiochus died, Jewish scribes immediately began adding frantic updates to the end of the book. Also see Jeremiah 88, Lying Pens of the Scribes. Look closely at how the timeline suddenly changes right at the end of the manuscript. So in Daniel 12, verses 11 and 12. So we have verse 11. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So 1,290 days, approximately 3.5 years. Daniel 12 and 12. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 35 days. So you have a discrepancy here. You have a discrepancy here. One says 1,290 days. One says 1,335 in the next verse. The author originally predicted the crisis would wrap up in 1,290 days. When that date passed and the ultimate cosmic kingdom of Elohim did not physically descend from the clouds, a scribe had to quickly update the manuscript, adding another 45 days to the clock. Blessed is he who waits and reaches 1,335 days. This is live, real-time damage control on a text whose prophetic expiration date kept hitting reality. It acts as a physical footprint of scribes altering a contemporary 2nd century document to keep the Maccabean movement from losing faith when the immediate end of the world failed to materialize. So what is the conclusion to the matter? Anachronism, folklore, and appended math. 1. They invented an empire, Darius the Mede. 2. They swapped the historical kings of the exile, Nabonidus for Nebuchadnezzar. 3. They edited the text live on the parchment when the predictions failed. The book is not an ancient crystal ball. It is a 2nd century emergency survival manual. So, as you brothers and sisters can see, 43 minutes, 48 minutes of proof that the book of Daniel is retrofitted, and a lot of the New Testament and Christ believers use that explicitly as proof of that they're Christ in the New Testament, etc. But it is a retrofitted written book. It's not ancient. Daniel didn't write it. None of it makes sense. Okay, and I'm sorry to have to bring this to you, but the Most High says to worship Him in truth and in knowledge. Knowledge and truth. Okay, so this is the truth and this is the knowledge. From the grammar and the text. Like I said, we went through all this. Almost an hour, 50 minutes worth of proof and detailed criticism of the book of Daniel under a microscope. So if I was able to edify you, please leave a comment, hit the like button, and share the video, and support the channel and support the entire truth getting out from the Hebrew perspective. All right, and if you're still enjoying your Shabbat Shalom. It's the end of my Shabbat. And so we will see you guys later on. Be on the lookout for the video. Hit the bell button so you get notified. Be on the lookout for more videos, more lectures coming this week. All right, Shabbat Shalom. Lehitudot, peace and blessings, everyone. May the Most High increase you all in good health, sound mind, and in wisdom. Baruch Hashem.
Makarnish beaderto, Yish beabegaloge gumin. Genesh hacho katarota arushanoto.